My name is Michelle Kennedy. Just an ordinary mom you might see anywhere. I'm not particularly striking, or do I have any deep hobbies? To anyone looking, I'm just another mom from the neighborhood with a normal family life. Apart from the fact that I'm raising a daughter who is now 7 years old and has special abilities, that day was supposed to be a fun shopping trip with Laura, my husband David's sister. Hanging out with Laura is nothing special for me. After all, she's been a confidant since before I married David, always ready to listen to my gripes about him, and even stepping in for me when David goes too far. David is a doctor. He's not a typical hospital or private practice doctor, but one who's been turning heads globally since his med school days with his research papers, often hailed as the future of American medicine at conferences. It's not uncommon for friends and colleagues to envy me for snagging such a husband. Even my parents and relatives were like that. David, being a doctor, and an outstanding one at that, received quite a bit of flattery. Whenever I talk about David, no matter to whom, responses like "I think that's something Michelle should just put up with," or "well, your husband does support you through his work after all," are common. They only see him through his medical achievements. Laura is perhaps the only person on earth who looks at David and me fairly. We met about a year after I started dating David. About a decade ago now, Laura remains remarkably powerful and always seems to have my back, just like she did back then. Now, shopping with Laura has become a monthly ritual, and we always plan our next outing before we part. Laura once described that natural sense of schedules falling into place like this.
It feels like visiting the dentist. After all, those folks seem to set up the next appointment under the guise of necessity, don't they?
I don't take such comments from Laura as sarcasm. That's just how she is. There's a refreshing lack of forced concern between us. Our meeting spot was a large department store in the downtown area. The department store across from it is part of the same chain, connected by walkways on each floor, making shopping very efficient, which is why we often go there. After shopping for fall clothes with my daughter Kathy, we decided to head to a cafe.
I prefer a cafe where I can eat pudding.
When I suggested to Laura a cafe where we could enjoy pudding, prompted by Kathy, Laura responded cheerfully to Kathy with a warm smile reminiscent of grandparents seen only during summer vacations, agreeing happily. According to Kathy, soft pudding either skimps on egg yolks or adds something unnecessary. So when she refers to pudding, she means the firm kind. She calls softer pudding as pudding-like sweets. As a mother, Kathy often says things I'd rather not let others hear, and she's very logical about it. Kathy also criticizes me with a level of detail not even a grouchy old man would.
Mom, it's not can eat, it's can be eaten.
Laura just kept smiling warmly. The cafe had a retro vibe, a rarity these days as it still allowed smoking. Filled with the sense of coffee and lingering tobacco smoke, we sat at a table for four, and Kathy immediately started a long discussion about the menu.
Hey, Mom, this menu is really nice. I thought places like this didn't care much about paper quality. Usually, it's just 200 pounds with clumsy text, but this is 400 pounds, and not just offset printed. They use letterpress for the logo and the shop name. It seems like the pudding will be good too.
I didn't understand what Kathy was talking about. All I knew was that she didn't like the paper used in menus at other cafes we'd been to, but she liked this one. Laura ruffled Kathy's hair with a boyish grin, a different expression from her earlier warm smile. As usual, I vented to Laura about David, feeling my frustrations wash away like organic waste finally clearing from a chronically clogged drain. David, in his way, used me as a sort of artificially created ally. much like the controversial former government official who once remarked that women are birth machines. The complaints I share with Laura mostly revolve around feeling unloved by him, especially lately. While there's no physical violence, his attitude can be appalling at times. Kathy doesn't seem interested in our marital discord, as she was overwhelmingly praising the pudding she'd been looking forward to.
Wow, this shop uses about 2.5 egg yolks per serving of pudding. The milk is simmered long enough to have no off flavors, making it very smooth. It looks like it's made with brown sugar, but this is actually raw sugar. Despite its color, it has no odd aftertaste.
Laura doesn't see Kathy as just any 7-year-old girl.
That means it's delicious,
She said, winking at Kathy with a slight tilt of her head, seamlessly, and without any hint of discomfort. I thought it was going to be a fun holiday like always. Yes, it certainly was a fun holiday. But something felt off. A very faint gravitational pull on my heart was trying to hold me back, but I just couldn't notice it at the time. It happened exactly 1 week later. Laura passed away suddenly. Laura, who looked so healthy and never seemed her age because of her vitality. I received the news around 8 p.m. after work. The call was from David, and it was a tough one. David had lost his father when he was young, and his mother, still alive, was now living in a nursing home. So, the news of Laura's death could only have come from David. When I happened to take the call, Kathy and I were in the middle of bringing in the laundry, so the news immediately reached her too. Yes, that's the only way I can describe it. It just reached her. Because before I even had time to think about how to tell Kathy, she had heard it herself.
Did something happen to Laura?
Had my voice carried over the phone, or did my expression give it away? Either way, Kathy had found out. And before I even hung up the phone, she had already started crying. It was a complicated feeling. I definitely didn't want David to become distraught or panicked. But for some reason, I was upset that David relayed Laura's death so matter-of-factly. As a mother, I may not score well, but seeing Kathy cry first made me feel like my own sadness was somehow allowed, and the surprises kept coming. I couldn't accept the sudden news of Laura's death, but that wasn't all. I couldn't accept it at all. How could Laura, who had been so lively just before, have passed away? The call from David conveyed that Laura had been chronically ill and had been living with an illness for a long time. Of course, I couldn't accept that either, but Laura, my greatest ally, was gone, and I was dealing with David, my greatest adversary. I couldn't ask about Laura with genuine feelings from David. Besides, even if I did ask, I wouldn't understand the medical jargon he'd likely respond with. That's just David. He would choose words that are difficult to understand on purpose.
It's not like you would understand anyway.
He would likely end with a silence that said just that. But there was a way. I could ask the doctor who wrote the diagnosis. I contacted the doctor who had issued the diagnosis and headed to the hospital without David knowing. There, even more shocking facts were revealed. The cause of Laura's death was not clearly understood. Kathy, who came with me, said to the doctor,
Even doctors don't know everything, huh?
To the doctor, who didn't know Kathy well, it must have seemed like just a little girl's comment. The doctor leaned in from his slightly taller chair and said,
Even your dad doesn't know some things, Kathy. It's way beyond us regular doctors.
Then, the pneumonia mentioned in the diagnosis, did you lie about it?
Kathy asked.
It's no lie. It really was pneumonia in the end. I can't lie in my career going forward, especially not about something like this. It wouldn't be fair to those who have passed.
Kathy didn't respond to what the doctor said. There's no way such a silly story could be true. I was desperately trying to hold back my anger at the doctor. On the way home, I ended up venting these feelings to Kathy.
Rather than that, we might be able to figure out the reason she died ourselves.
Kathy said to me with a very complex expression of sadness, joy, and calmness. And then, Kathy's next words made my feelings for Laura surge suddenly.
Actually, Mom, ever since I saw Laura last week, I've been thinking something like this might happen.
That very faint gravitational pull on my heart that day, it was this time, indifferent to our hearts, mercilessly moves on. David called, and we had to go to the funeral. David was the only one in the family healthy enough to move around, so he took time off work to prepare for the funeral and greet relatives, running around tirelessly. Watching the funeral happen through my own eyes, I couldn't believe it and found it impossible to focus. It was as if my brain refused to process the images. I'm sad, I'm lonely, and I'm frustrated that Laura, whom I love dearly, has suddenly gone forever. But I can't cry. I can't even think about such things. Trying at least to see Laura off peacefully in her coffin, Kathy and I said our final goodbyes. This is really the last chance to see Laura's face. It's truly the final moment. I close my eyes and reflect on everything. Memories with Laura come flooding back like flashbacks. While I'm lost in thought, David, standing behind me, snaps at me with thoughtless words.
How long are you going to stay there? The funeral home has limited time. Please hurry up.
David indeed had a tough role. The sudden news of his sister's death required work adjustments, and he had to handle all the funeral arrangements himself. Considering David's personality, he would have likely enlisted his subordinates and research staff to help with the simpler tasks. It might be because it's a family matter after all. Still, he didn't let me help at all, managing everything on his own. Yet, I couldn't contain my anger. She wasn't just your sister, David. Let us properly say goodbye at least this last time, I retorted to David louder than usual. David responded unflinchingly, coldly stating,
What changes because you said goodbye? Saying goodbye won't bring her back. And there's nothing you, a layperson, can do for her now in this state.
Why is he always like this? How far has he lived without understanding people's hearts? Is this what becomes of someone who has been pampered and hailed as the future of American medicine since their youth? If it stints the heart that much, I'd rather medicine didn't progress at all. I felt incredibly frustrated. And I said to David, you might indeed have the power to advance medicine, and maybe you are shouldering the future of American medicine. If that's the case, then all the great doctors in the US are idiots, entrusting our future to someone who can't even cherish his family. David immediately flared his nostrils in rebuttal.
You don't see anything about medicine. Family love and medicine are completely different. Just how much have you been helped by such doctors? You, in particular, live off my money. Show a little understanding of your place.
Helped? Whether it's the hospital or the money, if you weren't in this world, I'd choose to live in the happiness of your absence. Unlike you, full lives thanks to medicine, I live on my own terms. The argument went on and on. My personal grievances as a human and David's medical opinions never intersected, and the argument continued. It was Kathy who ended this argument.
We don't have time, do we?
Kathy's clear, unobstructed voice created a silence as if no one else were present. Although Kathy had been silent and seemingly apologetic all this time, I truly felt sorry to have her in such a situation as a couple. I just couldn't tolerate David's attitude anymore. Kathy stepped between us and let David continue the funeral. With an awkward cough, In a look of dissatisfaction from David, I made my final farewell to Lori. Then, something I hadn't noticed before caught my eye: a notebook. The cover of the notebook, as thick as a dictionary, had a title made up of various characters, triangles, squares, and alphabets. Of course, I couldn't understand what was written on it.
Laura had a hobby of writing incomprehensible notebooks. She's been doing it for about 5 years.
David said, speaking as if he couldn't understand it himself, to no one in particular. The title was indeed confusing, and so was the content inside. It was filled with lines and characters that seemed like a mix of multiple languages, making it even more incomprehensible. Kathy looked at the notebook and said,
I see. This is a diary.
I was shocked. No matter how smart Kathy is, she simply can't grasp the essence of this. That's what I was thinking just before Kathy spoke. She then whispered, barely audible next to my ear,
It's encrypted.
After that, Kathy read from the first page to the last at a speed reading pace. As she did, my heart rate increased, matching her speed. Could this slowly unravel the mysteries about Laura? Could Kathy, known as a genius girl to the world, solve all these mysteries? I imagined Kathy as the protagonist of a detective anime, eagerly waiting for her next words. Contrary to my beating heart and anticipation, Kathy was silently crying. "Kathy?" I asked as I looked into her face.
It's nothing.
That's all she said, holding onto that dictionary-like diary without putting it back in the coffin, clutching it as if it were precious. Her expression seemed a bit irritated with me. After we closed the coffin lid and sold Lori off outside, the relatives and the acquaintances started heading back to the funeral home. That was when it happened. Kathy alone did not return to the funeral home, but quietly walked in the opposite direction. I didn't miss it and followed her. At that moment, I still didn't understand the meaning behind Kathy's tears. I thought it was just the sadness from Laura's death overwhelming her, but it was completely different. When I caught up to her, I asked where she was going.
To the police.
She answered matter-of-factly. Though I couldn't grasp why, there was no point in me guessing. I decided to first listen to her reasons.
I've had this feeling from the start, but I couldn't connect the dots, and I've been thinking about it for a long time.
Kathy said, and I couldn't see the destination of her farts, unable to even begin to process them. She continued,
But I can't tell you everything right now, Mom. And it's better if I go to the police alone.
Of course, I asked her why.
Because if a little girl goes to the police crying, they'll listen sooner. Police might suspect a crazy adult, but they can't ignore a panicked little girl. Definitely not. And if an adult carries this diary around, they'll be more suspicious and it would waste time, right?
Kathy calmly explained it, as if it were the most obvious thing. Though I felt uneasy about letting Kathy go to the police alone, her next words made me see her point. Kathy gave me instructions.
There's something I need you to do, Mom. Make sure no one leaves until I return to the funeral home with the police. Only you can do this.
With that, Kathy ran off toward the nearby police station, clutching Laura's diary. Don't let anyone leave. Maybe there was someone at the funeral home related to Laura. Or was the perpetrator's name written in the diary? If so, she could have just told me the name. There was much to think about, but now wasn't the time to waste Kathy's efforts, so I hurried back to the funeral home. It was a 5-minute run to the nearby police station for Kathy. Another 5 minutes to explain the situation and return. I had to keep everyone at the funeral home for 10 minutes. That was my role. I thought about how to stall for 10 minutes to help unravel the mysteries surrounding Laura. Considering we had just seen off the casket, everyone was probably preparing to head to the crematorium. How can I buy 10 more minutes? I was desperate for time. There's no time. What should I do? I could feel my whole body heating up and beginning to sweat. Since there was no time to waste, I returned to the funeral home, and sure enough, everyone was preparing to go to the crematorium. My thoughts were still scrambled, but I yelled out loudly, "Everyone, please listen." My voice, honed from years of serious sports, carried well. Some people even jumped a bit in surprise. Now, what should I do? I hadn't thought of anything. "Everyone, please listen." I repeated the same thing twice to stall for time. From his expression, it was clear David was getting frustrated. After a brief silence, I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. "It's serious. My daughter Kathy is missing. Has anyone seen her?" Because everyone was busy talking to the people they came with, the funeral home buzzed with noise. David looked frustrated by what I was doing, but I couldn't worry about that. I needed to buy 10 minutes. "If anyone is available, could you please help look for her?" Of course, everyone had time. The next appointment for all was to move together to the crematorium. However, despite lying to buy time, I felt guilty that everyone was genuinely trying hard to find Kathy. That's right. That's okay. According to my watch, we had already managed to buy about 5 minutes by searching for Kathy. "I'll search outside, so could everyone please check inside the funeral home?" I suggested, looking under chairs and tables, making up things as I went along. "This should be all right. I need to get outside now, to make sure no one leaves." Time continued to tick away. 1 more minute, 30 seconds, 15, 10 minutes. But Kathy hadn't returned. When I went back inside, the mood had shifted to one of resignation, with people saying things like "she isn't here," "maybe she went outside," or perhaps "she went ahead to the crematorium." David was the most upset.
How could you lose sight of her, especially in such a small funeral home, while you were supposed to be watching her?
He ranted rapidly. And indeed, he had a point. Normally, it's the person who is missing who gets angry. The attention David's anger drew actually helped buy some time. David crossed his arms and paced around in a circle, clearly restless. Then, finally, Kathy returned. Well, not exactly Kathy, but 3 police officers appeared instead. Their sudden arrival threw the funeral home into turmoil. The buzz of confusion grew louder. David, frustrated by a lack of control over the situation, asked,
"What's this about?"
His tone was like that of a young man being questioned by the police. It was understandably a tough situation. Feeling somewhat sorry for David, I was stunned by what the police officer said next.
"Are you David Kennedy? We'd like to ask you some questions. Could you please come to the police car outside?"
What? David? That was undoubtedly my husband's name.
I don't understand. What does this mean?
David's mix of anger and confusion was evident. Overcome by the police's persistence, or perhaps just wanting it over with, David reluctantly got into the police car. The people in the funeral home were completely bewildered, standing in stunned silence. When Kathy returned, the diary was not with her. Before I could express my frustration, everyone around who had come to the funeral home was relieved and happy to see her. Some were even stroking her head with concern. Kathy wasn't confused by such things, of course. She probably knew I had only a few ways to stall them. Then, Kathy made a speech to everyone at the funeral home that lasted about 5 minutes, bringing this incident to a close. It was also sudden and unexpected.
Ladies and gentlemen, I believe my mother has caused you all some inconvenience. First, I am sorry for that. This was something I asked my mother to do. Please forgive her.
Some smiled fondly at Kathy's awkward formal speech, while others were surprised by how she started speaking.
I called the police. Why? Because it turned out that Laura we thought had died had a perpetrator behind her misfortune.
Kathy had already solved the mystery surrounding Laura. With tears in her eyes, Kathy continued. And the funeral home was wrapped in shock. No one uttering a word.
It was my dad.
What? David? It was like a scene straight out of an anime. Kathy then explained everything about the recent upheaval. First, the shocking truth, Laura was not actually dead. It seems Laura overheard David talking about a drug he was developing on his phone while visiting her mother-in-law's nursing facility. The conversation was about someone requesting him to develop a poison. After that day, Laura began keeping a diary, filled with things that no one else could understand. It was about 5 years ago. The developed drug induces severe lung issues and breathing difficulties upon consumption. But symptoms resolve after a few days, making it seem like a severe cold. Once David realized Laura knew about this, he drugged her. And then he made it look like Laura had died from illness. Due to a pre-existing lung condition, Laura's symptoms were severe enough that her pulse could not be detected. The doctor who made the diagnosis was relatively inexperienced and not yet fit for such a role, chosen by David for this reason. Kathy noticed 3 suspicious things about David. First, when Laura winked closely at her last week, she didn't think much of it at the time, but the frequency made her suspect various possibilities. One being Laura's peril. The diary mentioned she didn't tell us directly because she wanted to prevent harm to Kathy and me. Next, when she spoke with the doctor who treated Laura, he said, even Kathy's dad wouldn't know. And David firmly stated, I don't know, which she found odd. The final straw was the recent events. According to the diary, Laura had never shown or mentioned the diary to David. Yet, David had said, she's been like this for about 5 years. Which was strange since siblings don't normally keep track of each other's diaries for years. Reading the diary, Kathy found that Laura had cryptically written about seeing and hearing David's interactions with the client, and Kathy was moved to tears. Interestingly, the diary's code was simple enough for an elementary school student to understand. It was adults who overthought if who couldn't decode it. It was probably Laura's way of cautioning David about his arrogance. The last page expressed her hope to somehow keep me and Kathy apart from him for our safety. Kathy summarized all this in a clear, 5-minute speech. I hurriedly called the crematorium to return the coffin, then promptly explained the situation to the hospital and had them retrieve Laura, who was still sleeping. 3 days later, Laura woke up and resumed her life as if nothing had happened. That night, after everything had settled, Kathy came to tell me the results of decoding the diary.
I mentioned it at the funeral home too, but Laura, who found out Daddy's secret, seemed particularly averse to telling Mom, as it would put Mom in danger too. She decided to stop Dad's misdeeds alone. The fear and anxiety she felt during that time came through, even in the coded diary. She really wanted to be with us more. The last entry from when we met last week said, "Thank you for everything," showing she really risked her life writing this diary.
Kathy calmly explained.
Laura is an incredible person, isn't she?
She licked her upper lip as if to say, see, I conveyed it well, didn't I? Now, it looks like we can enjoy our monthly Laura time.